Hello, today we visit r/AskReddit to see who was actually the worst president ever. I have included the funny answers first, so if you are here for a laugh you can do that. After those are the more political ones. I will say for the American presidents I am just reporting what Reddit has said and they may or may not represent my views. Feel free to debate in the comments down below. With that, sit back and enjoy. The president of my HOA. I hate that bitch too, and I don't even know them. My dad is the president of his HOA and has told me about times he's had to knock on people's doors because their lawn needed to be mowed. He can't understand why some of his neighbors don't like him. My dad was the president of his HOA for the sole purpose of making sure the HOA wasn't a pain in the ass. My dad did something similar, he did it for like 20 years. He has a plaque for the community's appreciation and everything. He stopped and was like, I want to spend time with my family, etc. As soon as he retired they asked him to come back. All he does is tell people don't break lawns. He doesn't give a duck what your lawn looks like or if you want to paint your house pink. This is why I joined the HOA board in my community. The people were the problem, not the board, especially during the first year of COVID. People had nothing to do but bitch online about every little thing, and outside companies weren't doing their jobs, again, because COVID. I ended up resigning after someone told me, behind a keyboard, not to my face, that it was my fault that our garbage cans weren't being picked up promptly. This, despite the fact that I had spent over 15 documented hours on the phone with the company and the local government officials, as had our management company. I barely talk to any of these ducks any longer. Steve, senior high-class president, class of 1992. You ran on a platform of getting porno mags in the school library. It's been 30 years, Steve. There are still no porno mags in the school library. Steve, I voted for you, dude. You had one job. Yeah, duck you, Steve. I'm gonna tell C-SPAN to update their list. My college drama club president, dude was in charge of a pizza party and he messed it up bad. We all ended up only getting one slice each. The president of drama club creates drama so rich that people still talk about his pizza party years later. Shocking. It turns out that the real drama was the one we made along the way. Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA. Sepp Blatter would like to have a word with you. Sepp Blatter was a man who sold the World Cup to the highest under-the-table bidder. Blatter was a simple man, driven by personal enrichment. Infantino literally defended corruption, sportwashing, archaic views on sexuality, and a Middle Eastern backwaters right be a bunch of horrible pricks. He did this by saying that Europe should be the ones apologizing for it. He promised reform, and instead he crumbled under the first sign of pressure. Mobutu Sese Seko, president of Zaire, aka Democratic Republic of the Congo, by far is the worst president. After deposing and executing the former president Patrice Lumumba, he then went to turn the country to an insanely corrupt autocracy, gutting the natural wealth of the country as well as its institutions to enrich himself to the tune of up to $15 billion. The man had the country build him an airstrip in the middle of the jungle near a palatial estate known as the Versailles of the jungle, so that he can charter a Concorde to take him to go shopping in Paris. There were uncountable human rights violations and massacres attributed to him during his rule. His support for the Hutu extremists after the Rwandan genocide directly led to the First and Second Congo Wars, which attributed to the deaths of some 6 million people. Yeah, American presidents don't come close to how terrible this guy was. With the help and backing of Belgian intelligence and the CIA. The photo of Kennedy receiving the news always gives me chills. Was he not in the loop on this one? Was he genuinely upset? Does this have anything in common to his dosing of the Dulles brothers from basically running US foreign affairs? The CIA has a tendency to go rogue, which is a scary thought seeing as we don't know what they're up to at this very moment. And the president is rarely in the loop, unless something is done by their request. Kennedy said that if he was re-elected, he'd smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. So it's safe to say he didn't have a lot of control over them, much less any good feelings going their way. Kennedy was somewhat outspoken when it came to his feelings about the CIA, and his thoughts about dismantling them. Which is why people believe the CIA were responsible for his death. I am one of those people, but this entire paragraph is a side tangent. So feel free to ignore it. Assuming president just means leader of a country, not counting Hitler, easily Pol Pot. Just supremely evil, and his actions go under the radar because it happened in a country, Cambodia, the West rarely thinks about. Pol Pot might be worse than Hitler, to be honest, but I suppose we shouldn't make it a competition. I'd imagine there are several dictators who would be worse given the opportunity, but just didn't have the opportunity, or, thankfully, were ousted before that point. Hitler is often put up as the most evil because he's so high profile in the Western world. I'd agree that given the opportunity, other political leaders could have been just as bad. I'd also take it a step further and say that plenty of average people have that same level of evil within them but just have no power to carry those plans out. With a lot of dictators, it's hard to rank them on the evil scale, because their crimes don't really have any way to compare them. In the example of Pol Pot versus Hitler, we could compare the killing fields versus the Holocaust. Killing fields were much more brutal and decimated the local population, whilst the Holocaust was basically industrialized murder, and saw people shipped to their death from across Europe. They're both crimes against humanity, but carried out so differently. How can you say which was worse? If I recall correctly, Pol Pot holds the world record speed run for dropping average life expectancy to under 20 years old. And heaven forbid you wear glasses. Reagan was pretty shit. He can be blamed for most of economic worries we've been facing due to his greedy trickle-down economic scam. Can't believe how far I had to scroll for this. That man set America's demise in motion. I would argue that Obama's administration was a disaster in that it did not address root causes for the '08 crash and washed away any hope of a legitimately progressive Democratic establishment. Likewise, the roots of the '08 crisis were Clinton's decisions. The Democrats have generally operationalized all the disasters created by their Republican counterparts, without stopping them. See drone strikes, Gitmo, dragnet surveillance, immigration reform. None of the late 20th century Democrats were disasters in the same way as the Republicans were. They were disasters at being opposition to the Republicans, though. The major point you made of Republicans being worse presidents is correct, however. Even by their own metrics, the Republicans fail at governance, in no small part because they don't believe in governance. Robert Mugabe, probably. Got a friend of mine who was shot as a kid when his family farm was seized by Mugabe followers. His mum, dad, sister and youngest brother were shot too and left for dead. His youngest brother, 3 at the time, did not survive. Harrowing story. Farm murders weren't uncommon under Mugabe's tenure. The fact that this man lived out his later years in great wealth and free from conviction due to diplomatic immunity is simply criminal. Don't forget that after his thugs shot, robbed and took the very productive farms, they proceeded to fail to farm and sent the country into an economic disaster. The breadbasket of Africa was broken, and I can only imagine how many people starved because of it. Then around 2020 Zimbabwe was like, hey we're sorry. Please come back and farm. We'll talk about getting your land back. The whole situation started ducked up, for more ducked up, and is ending up equally ducked up. Worst part is that as far I know South Africa is experiencing sort of the same thing now. South Africa is experiencing gangs of poor South Africans going out and killing farmers in remote areas. They simply don't like people who seem well off on their soil. Nixon committed treason in order to prolong the Vietnam War before he even got elected. Watergate is more well known but less of a crime, really. What makes Watergate so funny is that it was completely unnecessary. Nixon was bossing the election, and had Watergate not happened, he likely would be remembered as one of the better presidents of the post-war era. Yes, the paranoia is what did him in. Why do you think he'd be thought of highly? Nixon had a lot of victories. Started easing relations with China, created OSHA, created the EPA, got us out of Vietnam, but still dropped a lot of bombs on Cambodia. I believe he also signed one of the big anti-nuke treaties. I forget which one. Sadly, I believe Nixon is mostly responsible for the war on drugs. Yes, I believe one of his staffers said that Nixon started the war on drugs in order to criminalize urban blacks and anti-war hippies. Not cool, dick. Ferdinand Marcos basically starved our nation. And the DANM people still elected his son to be the current president. And probs every single president in the Philippines. I'm supposed to type Marcos, but I'm glad someone has the same idea as I do. Dude ducked our country with debt that people are still gonna pay till 2025. And here comes the Marcos Jr. gonna make sure Filipinos will pay for his parties and vacations for generations. John Tyler is rarely mentioned, but he gets my vote. I'm reading his biography right now. He is the only U.S. president who renounced his American citizenship after leaving office in order to join a nation making war on the United States. He literally committed treason after leaving office. I think a strong argument can be made for James Buchanan. He literally let the United States fall apart on his watch and took no action. By some accounts, he even shipped arms supplies south so the rebels could seize them. In a similar notion, sorts by controversial. ETA, I'm gonna stick to American presidents because that's where my strongest understanding of history is. But I'd go with James Buchanan. He was the guy before Lincoln while tensions between states were increasing rapidly, and instead of actually doing anything he just kinda let everything boil over. Let me tell you about Jacob Zuma. If you ever hear any government or organization say, "We are investigating ourselves over allegations misconduct, corruption," expect that everything that follows will be complete lies. They only investigate themselves because any external investigation wouldn't yield the outcome they want. The findings of those internal investigations were decided before they began. We Dutch have a saying for this. De slager die zijn eigen vlees keurt, the butcher appraising his own meat. Basically, it means that anytime any group or person decides to investigate their own actions, it's basically fully unreliable. Thank you for watching all the way until the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment what you ate for breakfast. If you want to continue to watch my content, click the video up above. Until next time.